I'm going to be doing a presentation called the Wellington Test, how not to burn your standards. And it's going to be looking at best practices for building standards, especially as moving into the sort of agentic world. We probably are going to need more standards, but I think importantly, we need to make sure we don't repeat the same mistakes of the past. So this is a Beef Wellington. For those that don't know, it's created by its very famous dish from celebrity chef Gordon Ramsay. So why am I speaking about Beef Wellingtons? Well, importantly, they're layered, they're created in a sequenced way, and famously, they're very difficult to get right under pressure, as you'll see in Hell's Kitchen and Kitchen Nightmares, as Gordon Ramsay shouts at his chefs. So this is just like standards. Standards maybe seem simple on the surface, but they're constructed carefully, like a Beef Wellington. They're made of layers, each layer below depending on the layer above. So it's important to get standards right. And just like at Beef Wellington, it's very important we don't undercook our standards. Otherwise, the open standards community is going to shout at us and go, it's raw. And then equally, it's very important that we don't overcook our standards, because when a standard takes too long within an open source community or within a standards organization, often it loses its flavor if it's worked on for too long. So we need to make sure that it's cooked right and it's not overcooked or undercooked. So while we're making our standards, we also have the pressure of customers, like people going to a restaurant and waiting for their food to be cooked. Sometimes they might wonder, why is this piece of work taking so long? Why is the standard taking so long? And we often see in the standards development world that the pressure to satisfy customers quickly is exactly what leads us to both undercook and overcook our standards. So I think of this as a sort of kitchen nightmare. Teams often, when trying to get something done quickly, and we're seeing this a lot in the credentials world, which I'll touch on in a second. Yeah, we're seeing this a lot in the credentials world recently, where teams are really quick to try and throw something together to meet deadlines. We've got the EU Digital Identity Wallet deadlines of 2027, and people are trying to rush to make standards work to fit these emerging sort of ecosystems. But overbuilding or hard coding assumptions into standards often creates choices that don't scale. Equally, when people are working in isolation, whether that's teams, whether that's standards organizations, it creates fragmentation. So how I like to think about the best practice for standards development is we need to share recipes, otherwise we're all going to invent our own dish. So I'm going to touch on two quick examples. I think these two standards are both very relevant right now, especially as we're starting to think of agentic identity. So firstly, decentralized identifiers often get criticized because they're quite flexible. There is over 200 DID methods on the market, and there are many unstandardized methods. And for this reason, the criticism of DIDs is that they may be too unstandardized and this slows adoption. And then conversely, at the moment in the identity world, we're seeing a standard called SD-JWT VC, which is built in a very rigid way. It doesn't allow for extensibility or flexibility beyond the scope of how the standards authors have created the standard. So it's rigid with web PKI. And the issue here is that if you try and evolve the standard, it might break future interoperability. So in this sense, Gordon Ramsay might say that DIDs are too raw, and SD-JWT has lost all its flavor because it's been cooking at IETF so long. So the problem here is when we start to build imperfect standards, the customer will say, oh, we don't want to eat at this restaurant anymore. Let's just go back to what we know, where provides consistent food. And we're seeing a sort of backtracking to things like TLS certs, which have been around since the 90s. They serve as the backbone for the trust infrastructure on the internet, but we can do better than that. When standards fail to converge, we retreat to more predictable infrastructure, even if we're trying to innovate and we're trying to evolve past that point. So it's so important to get standards right. So another problem that's worth highlighting is, let's not try and get a group of people together and reinvent everything. I think there is a real issue in the standard space of different groups trying to build the whole stack themselves. So we see a bit of a divergence in certainly the identity world between, say, the W3C stack and the IETF stack. In W3C, it's centered around DIDs and verifiable credentials, but IETF have gone, no, we'd rather use web PKI and SD-JWT VCs and do things a little bit of our own way. And then you have plenty more stacks out there. You have the ISO stack, you have anon cred stack, and I think overlap is good, but misaligned overlap leads to incompatible layers, and that's what I think we should, moving into AI, try and evolve. So I'm going to introduce the concept of sort of the standards governance stack, or what I like to call the sort of standards kitchen brigade. So for me, effective solutions and products come when we take the best bits of standards or protocols from different places. And I think it's important to acknowledge, as we move into this agentic world, what standards organizations are best placed to carry out to create different standards or carry out different parts of the stack. For example, IETF heavily focuses on interaction and exchange protocols, OpenID for so SD-JWT VC, whereas W3C focuses quite heavily on data models like the verifiable credential model. Whereas groups like Trust over IP, which we'll maybe get into later in the event, focus quite heavily on governance and trust framework. So if we acknowledge where the sort of standards organizations have specialisms, we can make sure to cook our standards in the right places. If we take our standards to the wrong standards organization, it's like taking a steak to a pastry chef and saying, can you cook that? They'll probably cook it, but they probably won't cook it very well. So we need to be very aware of which organizations have the sort of superpower for building the different parts of the standard stack. So to summarize, I think we should all, going forward in this event and going forward into thinking about standards for agents and AI, we should ask, does this standard pass the Wellington test? Is it both not rushed and not over-engineered? Is it structurally layered? And is there a governance authority or governance body, a standards organization, that neutrally governs the standard? And can it be flexible and move around different standards organizations? Is it tied into one, or is it flexible to move between each other? Because if we coordinate the ecosystem and separate responsibilities clearly, we can produce food or standards that the whole industry can rely on. And this relies on not just good engineering, but good governance. So yeah, thank you very much for listening. This is just a very quick intro to standards best practices. And a final thought to leave you all with is, there's a very fine line between a beef Wellington and a corn dog. Beef Wellingtons, layered, they're built on quality, with quality, but if we rush something too quickly, it's very easy to end up with a corn dog. So we should really, really try to make sure that we are applying the Wellington test. And while corn dogs are great and they're passable, we don't want to build our world out of corn dogs. We'd much rather do it out of Wellington. So thank you very much, everyone. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the event.